He was not always this. That is the detail that makes everything worse. Not a demon summoned from somewhere, low outside the world. Not a force of destruction that arrived without history. A man disciplined, precise, entrusted with responsibility because he had demonstrated the qualities that made him worthy of it, who chose over many years and in many small decisions to become the thing that lives inside the lantern now. The becoming was gradual. That is always how it works with the worst things. His name is Thresh. And the story of how a keeper of cursed objects became something that makes the cursed objects look manageable is the story that nobody who encounters him gets to. Inish telling. New here? Subscribe. Every week, a League of Legends story told the way it deserves to be heard. The Brotherhood that made him was organized around a single purpose: knowledge. Not the comfortable kind, not the knowledge that expands what is possible in cheerful and beneficial directions. The knowledge that sits at the edges of what should be known, the kind that has been locked away, not because it is unimportant, but because it is too important and too dangerous to leave accessible. Artifacts of tremendous power and tremendous instability. Objects that had been the instruments of catastrophes and had survived the catastrophes. Spells that existed in portent. Written form specifically, so that no one would attempt to reconstruct them from memory. Someone had to know where these things were. Someone had to know what they were. Someone had to ensure they stayed contained. The Brotherhood's leadership identified Thresh as ideal for the specific responsibilities involved, not because he was the most powerful among them, because he had something rarer in the Shura. Context of a vault full of objects that wanted to do things to the minds of the people near them, an exceptionally strong will. The kind of inner architecture that does not bend easily. The kind of duvet stability that was the primary qualification for long-term proximity to things that spent all their folly. Available energy, destabilizing whoever was closest. He took the commission. He descended into the vaults. He began the work. Here's the thing about will that the people who trusted Threshes did not fully understand. Strength is not the same as invulnerability. A strong will can resist longer. It cannot resist indefinitely. The artifacts in those vaults had been doing what they do for centuries before Thresh arrived, and they would be doing it long after any individual keeper was gone. They were not in a hurry. They had all the time available to work on him. The process was not dramatic. It was not a single moment of corruption or a decisive choice toward darkness. It was the specific slow erosion that happens when a mind is exposed continuously to things that want to reshape it. The artifacts fed on the parts of him that were already there. Fear. Everyone has fear. The artifacts found his and amplified it, turned the volume up until it occupied space that had previously been available for other things. Doubt. The specific doubt that tells a person they're Fizalbik. Control is an illusion, and the things they are controlling know it. And beneath the fear and the doubt, something older and quieter, that Thresh himself may not have known was there until the Ravas. Objects began turning it up, the part of a person that finds other people's weakness interesting. That notices the exact moment when someone's composure cracks. That feels, in that moment, not sympathy but something else entirely. He had always had this. The artifacts did not put it there. They simply helped him find it and then made it larger than everything around it. The Brotherhood saw a disciplined keeper. They saw their choice confirmed. The man was exactly what they had assessed him to be, serious and contained and unaffected by what he shopagarded. They were reading the surface, which he had learned very early in the process to manage with the specific skill of someone who understands that what others see of you is largely bitavus. What you show them, he was showing them a keeper. What he was becoming was something else. The living book was how it started to become visible, to him, though not yet to anyone else. He discovered what he could do with it by accident, and then, in the specific way that discoveries become practices, continued doing it deliberately. The book was alive in the way that certain pointed biaxes, enchanted objects are alive, aware, responsive, possessing something that functioned as distress when harmed. He found the distress interesting. He explored the interest methodically. He walai, removed pages, observed the response, replaced them. He removed them again. He studied what the experience was doing to the book and what the book's responses were doing to him. What they were doing was teaching him the geography of suffering, where its edges were, what increased it, what reduced it, how to maintain it at a precise level that kept the object's awareness engaged rather than retreating into the numbness that extreme distress eventually produces. He applied what he learned to the mirror, the ancient one, housing the soul of a wizard who had been there for centuries and who had been counting on the glass to remain transparent. He matted the glass until the wizard inside lost the ability to see. He watched the reaction. He polished it back. He started over. He was building something, not a technique, exactly something more fundamental than Data technique. An understanding of the relationship between power and suffering that would later define everything he did. The spells were the final refinement. He learned to begin them with full intention, to allow the words to build the anticipation that magic creates in the things it is directed at, and then to stop one syllable before completion and watch what happened in the space where resolution should have been. The suspended moment, the particular agony of a thing that has been demometuate, brought almost to its conclusion and then denied it. He was exquisite at this. He had always had precision. The precision found a new application. What the chronicles of the Brotherhood do not record, because no one who knew was in a furry position to write it down. The moment Thresh understood that what he was becoming was not a corruption of what he had been but a completion of it, that the man they had trusted with the bay shine, up 6 wajaz galulo, Nifulavoltsaista, and the man who was now systematically exploring the limits of what suffering could be, Galua hulula wajain, extended to Lua Ra'ach Alua were not two different people. They had always been the same person. The artifacts Splo and Nux had simply removed the noise between him and himself. The dark wizard arrived in chains. The Brotherhood brought him down to the vaults as containment. The magic in the vaults was dense enough to suppress whatever he might attempt, and the chains were additional insurance. He was a practitioner of forbidden body magic, techniques that had allowed him to merge raw, arcane energy with his own tissue until his body could repair damage that should have been Makabar kill. Fatal. He could not be easily killed. He had been captured. Instead, Thresh looked at what had been brought to him. He understood immediately what it meant, not as a prisoner, as a gift, a living object, the most complex kind, that had been specifically engineered to survive what living objects usually could not. He had spent years exploring the limits of what he could do with things that eventually broke. What had been placed in his care was something that could not be broken in the ordinary sense. He could work indefinitely. He used a hook. He was careful about it. Careful in the specific way of someone who understands that permanence requires patience, that the goal is not the maximum amount of damage as quickly as possible, but the sustained amount that keeps the subject present and responsive. He healed between sessions. He resumed when healing was complete. He brought a Jeksan to Thiahi, the chains when he came, so that the sound of their approach across the stone would precede him far enough in advance to produce the specific anticipatory suffering that had become his Bishoy. Primary interest. He began carrying the chains always, even when he was not going to the wizard's cell. Especially Ferris. Ide kau kondai dime tidi. Iksat then. The other Brotherhood members had noticed something about Thresh without understanding. What they were noticing, he had become unreachable. Not hostile. He was never hostile, never. Gave them a reason to intervene. Simply absent in the way that people become absent when the Shachin, thing that occupies their interior life, is something they cannot share. He ate in his chamber. He ate in his chamber. He iman da'on, moved through the underground passages without coming to the upper levels. He had stopped ache, he stopped, looking like someone who spent time in daylight, which he had stopped doing. They gave him space, they did not investigate. When the ruination came, it came all at once. The catastrophic wave of death energy that swept the island killed nearly everything it touched. Or rather, it did what it does, dissolved the boundary between life and death, leaving the affected in a state that was neither. Most of those caught in the wave suffered the dissolution of Kowa's coherent identity. The self, in most people, is not robust enough to survive the removal of Kowa's. Everything that had been maintaining it. Thresh did not lose himself in the wave. He had already found himself before it arrived. The version of him that emerged on the other side was the version that had been under construction for years, stripped now of the bodies, limitations, freed from the Brotherhood's oversight, released from any external constraint on For Egasura, what he could do, and to whom. He was not frightened by what had happened. He was interested pilum roque of assemblage in what it made possible. The undead that stumbled through the ruins of the island were, to him, material. Souls without sufficient will to maintain themselves were abundant and not particularly useful. What he was interested in was the other kind, the ones who still had something inside them, who still had tainmo, azai tapel biafli parkol bia achim asakawelabu, the capacity to suffer, which required the capacity to want things, which required some remnant, biafli parkol of self-consciousness, which was rarer than it should have been. He found his criteria and refined them. The brightest minds, the strongest wills, the people who had the most capacity for hope, because hope was what suffering required as its opposite number, and the suffering that occurred in the complete absence of hope was a lesser and less interesting thing than the shilberate. Suffering that occurred while hope still existed and was being systematically dismantled. He is still selecting, still adding to the lantern, still applying, with the patience of something that Jolo no longer experiences time as a limitation, the understanding he spent years building in the Greerdrick. Vaults of a Brotherhood that trusted him with things they should not have trusted anyone with. He does not hurry. The best things never do. If this story reached you, subscribe. Every week, the full lore of a League of Legends champion, told the way it deserves to be heard.